So our next speaker is Dr. Dave Newbern, whose applied research and extension programs focuses on two main areas: water quality and the Chesapeake Bay, and land use policies for the preservation of Maryland farmland and forests. Dr. Newbern's work on water quality and the Chesapeake Bay evaluates effectiveness of voluntary incentive programs like subsidies for adopting agricultural conservation practices on cover crops and riparian buffers, as well as water quality trading. He received his PhD from University of California at Berkeley and was appointed to serve on the Chesapeake Bay Program's Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. He currently serves on the Maryland Stream Relief Coordinating Committee, and I will turn it over to Dave.
Okay, well, thanks, everybody. I first want to introduce the team. You know, I'm an extension specialist on campus as well as associate professor. Eric Lichtenberg's another professor in my department. The other three are graduate students, two of which did their PhD, Young Kim and Hal Wan, and now they have graduated. But anyways, this is a long-term project over the last 5 years or so on riparian buffer adoption in Maryland and the environmental benefits both from water quality, cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, but also forest carbon sequestration. And I also want to take a moment to thank the Hughes Center. The Hughes Center provided really crucial funding as well as the MAIS, the Maryland Agricultural Experiment Station, for the survey, but the Hughes Center for the integrative model that you're seeing, and provided crucial funding, particularly for Young Kim in the final year. And he went on to get the Outstanding Dissertation Award from the National Association of Ag Economists, as well as another award from the Environmental Resource Economists. And he's did a postdoc at Oxford, and now he just started as assistant professor at University of Florida. So in Maryland, and actually across the Bay, there's been a Bay-wide agreement as part of the Bay Agreement that was signed in 2014 to set a 70% goal that the stream sides were covered in forest buffer. And the states, including Maryland, have not met that. This is the dashed line shows some analysis that was done by the Hughes Center. Chesapeake Conservancy is a few years old, but obviously a lot of progress, but not quite meeting that Bay Agreement goal. And one of the programs, the USDA Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which started in the early 90s, or mid-90s, and around 1997, 1998, Maryland was one of the first states to enroll and create a program. There was an early wave of adoption. So the stream buffers that were planted in the late 90s and early 2000s, you can see are ramping up that early adoption. Since then, it's been harder to get the remaining landowners in. If you go out to the current date, it's kind of trended in that way, that getting that additional remaining landowners has been a little more challenging, and it's not met some of the goals that were stated earlier. Now, as I mentioned, the USDA Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CREP, I'll refer to that a lot, that comes from the USDA, but partnered with MDA and DNR to some extent. And Maryland is one of those first states that get in. There's both grass and forest buffers. So grass buffers are typically 10-year contracts, forest buffers are 15. And they are paying now, they're paying the installation costs, the full installation cost of plant buffers. Maryland, part of the Tree Solutions Act, they're providing an extra $1,000 incentive, $1,000 per acre incentive. And they also pay for the lost farm revenues. So there's annual payments based on the soil quality, soil rental rate. Now, one of the interesting things is that the MDA did a listening session. When they talked to people, they basically found that people wanted shorter contracts, and they also wanted more of the money up front. So they can't change CREP. CREP is a national program, USDA, partner with different states. But they were able to explore a different program. In this project, we did an experiment where we're able to change things like the payment levels up front are annually, as well as contract length for grass and forest. And we can explore not only these programs, but a range of other types of programs to see what benefits you would get and the cost. So the next slide is an overview of the rest of the presentation, where We're trying to evaluate environmental outcomes. That's water quality improvements, nitrogen and phosphorus reductions, as well as carbon sequestration under different policies. The program attributes, things like the payment levels up front or annually, or the contract length, those affect the likelihood that landowners will enroll. And we can also understand for each scenario, understand the program effectiveness, how many benefits you get, and how much cost for how much cost. So the first scenario that we're going to eventually get to is just understanding how CREP is doing. But then we can explore some alternative scenarios like MDA's idea of more upfront versus annual payments or shorter contract lengths, as well as targeting bonus payments. Right now, the $1,000 goes equally to everywhere. And equal payments are not efficient. You'd want to target best bang for your buck and target. So we'll do a scenario where you pay landowners that have higher nitrogen reductions a higher bonus than others. As well as carbon markets, there's nascent carbon markets. So what if you paid on top of CREP the money for the carbon sequestration being done? The two big parts of this talk, the first part is going to be based on a landowner survey and the econometric or statistical model of behavior on what affects the likelihood of enrollment. The second is more the environmental side, the assessment, where we're looking at a parcel level, the site-specific environmental benefits when you move into either forest or grass buffers. And that's using the Chesapeake Bay program model, which is oftentimes known as CAST, or the Chesapeake Assessment Scenario Tool. We'll complement that with forest carbon model that comes from some data that I'll explain later on. Now, for the landowner survey, what we're essentially doing is we take the tax assessor data, spatially specific parcel level tax assessor data for the entire state, and we screen, first of all, just on ag tax code. It means that these properties qualify, they have enough income to qualify as an ag property. The other thing we do is we overlay the USDA cropland data layer, and we're able to say that they have at least 10 acres of crops or hay and pasture. And the other thing we overlay is the streams and rivers to make sure that they are adjacent or within the property. That's coming from the USGA National Hydrography data. But essentially, the parcels that you see qualify for all that, and we mailed a letter to each of those, to the owners of those properties. So the survey that we developed a survey over a number of years, and we, in addition to our team, we reached out to different groups that we've been working with over the years, from state agencies like DNR and MDA, nonprofits, and USDA, as well as extension agents. And then Darren Jarboe, because we got some people were concerned, where's the survey? Is it a scam? And Darren Jarboe sent out a broadcast email to extension saying, no, this is a real deal. And we got a pretty good response rate because of that. So we mailed this out summer of 2021, and it's a letter. So someone gets a letter in the mail, and in that is a URL, and they go to the website and they fill out the survey. But they also fill out an ID, and then we can link their exact response back to the spatial parcel layer in GIS. And we, out of the 8,900 people, we got about a 17% response rate. We also allowed people to do it by mail. If mainly we encourage people to do it online. It's easier to collect the data. But if some people want to do the mail, we'd send them out a paper copy, and they would just return it that way. So the survey takes about 20 minutes, about 30 pages long, but it's collecting information about the buffer acreage, year installed, did they get money, yes or no, is it grass or forest, and they can enter up to 3 different buffers, the largest buffers on their property. Also, we collect general information about their crop acreage. These are landowners, whether they own and operate or rent out to others, their farm income, and other kind of information about demographics about them, or their attitudes about government monitoring or taking on risky investments, as well as in GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, we know the land area with this high-resolution data, 1-meter data that comes from the Chesapeake Conservancy, as well as we know the soil type, so we can calculate the soil rental rate. That's important for these programs. Now, this is a crucial slide, because this is how we do experiments to not only look at existing programs, but new programs. And it's what's called a choice experiment. So what we're doing is we're offering, there's 48 different designs where we're offering different combinations of these program attributes. Some programs could have grass, others buffers. They have different levels of bonus payments, different level of annual payments, different levels of contract length. And out of those 48 different designs, we're sending 4 randomly to each landowner. And they just choose yes or no. Okay, I'll show you an example in a second. All of them require that at least 35 feet minimum for the buffer width, and they all guaranteed installation and maintenance costs covered. Installation cost is fully covered. And this is an example of one that they would see. So they would see something like this as a grass buffer. It's $500 bonus. The annual payment is $250, and it's for 10 years. And then the bottom table is just that in long form. And they just ask, would you enroll? Yes or no? And they see 4 of those. But across the thousands of people, we show all examples. So from that, we can do a behavioral model, a statistical model, which is essentially estimating the probability based on the program attributes that are being offered, the characteristics of the landowner, their demographics, and also their farm characteristics. And we can figure out what things matter as far as what things are more important to that decision making. So what we find is that people like money, okay? That's not a surprise. Upfront and annual payments, people like both of those. But when you look at some extra analysis looking at the trade-off, what we can do is figure out that they suggest that landowners have a strong preference for upfront payments. That was something that was found in the listening sessions from MDA, and we found it was quite strong, that it actually turns into a discount rate, or what we like an internal borrowing rate of anywhere between 15 and 30%. People like money up front. Contract length, not so important. Slightly positive, but not significant. But there's people want a secure payment for a long time, but also longer contracts is a longer restriction on the property. As far as the farmer parcel that are more likely to enroll, if they had already participated in a program and so they have remaining land on their property, they could still put in a buffer. If they had prior experience, they're more likely to do it. But if they have high quality land, high soil rental rate, less likely to enroll. High percent farm income, less likely to enroll. And senior citizens that maybe are transitioning the land to somebody else, don't want to be in a long-term contract, as well as those who are opposed to property monitoring or don't like tax revenue being used for farm programs in general. One of the things that we found was really interesting is that we're giving 4 different programs, some of which are quite high. At least one of the 4 were quite high. 46% of landowners said no to all 4. They said no, 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 no. So that means that there's a lot of people that just money, they're not gettable in a way. There's some other barrier going on the property. Some of that is those characteristics. They're, the senior citizen that are likely to transition the farm, or maybe they're worried about deer damage because the high quality land on the remaining farm, the buffer might induce that. There are lots of reasons for that. It's something that we've studied to some extent, but there's a lot more to be said. Now let me move to the integrative assessment. So about water quality and carbon, starting with water quality. So this is, if anybody's heard of the Chesapeake Bay program model, or the total maximum daily load, there's a tool that is used by all jurisdictions, the state of Maryland as well as the others, that we're relying on that. We're relying on the parameters of that, and I'll focus on a 15-year forest buffer for clarity, but we can do any buffer length or 5, 10, or 15 years, grass or forest. The idea is that if you put in a forest buffer, you're going from cropland in the buffer to forest. There are other things like the buffer efficiency that removes nitrogen and phosphorus running through the buffer from the adjacent land, as well as where is that property in the bay, how much of that nitrogen that leaves the farm enters the bay. Those are factors that are part of that. And then there's also studies that are done by the EPA as well as a group at Penn State that look at the social cost. So if you're reducing pollution, that's a benefit. So we're able to look at the pounds of say, nitrogen over 15 years, look at the social cost of nitrogen, do the same thing for phosphorus, and we can get those benefits. It's mainly, most of the benefits are nitrogen, just a lot more nitrogen in the system. So this shows an example of where those benefits are higher, where that nitrogen load reduction is higher. You can see the eastern shore, the upland areas where the coastal plains are in a geographic zone that are upland, has higher reduction than areas that are tidally influenced by salt. Another area, if you look in Baltimore County, that there are reservoirs like Liberty, Loch Raven, Pretty Boy. Those reservoirs are like a BMP. You get nitrogen in there, it doesn't, a lot of it gets processed in the reservoir. If we go to carbon, there was a study pioneered, University of Maryland Geography Department is one of the best in the world, and people like Rachel Lamb and L.A. Campbell, who are now working for MDE and DNR respectively during their dissertation, were part of a large team that's pioneered using LIDAR and high-resolution modeling to do carbon, starting in Maryland and now it's across the Northeast for the areas that are under the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. But they also created an ecosystem demography model that incorporates at a parcel level, or really a 30-meter level, things like temperature, precipitation, soil depth, water retention, other characteristics. You can grow out trees from now into the future. We took areas that were bare ground, parcels that didn't have any trees, grew out forest for 15 years to figure out how much sequestration we get. And then there's the social cost of carbon that comes from the EPA and others, but only $418 is a lot, but that's for permanent storage. We're looking for a 15-year contract. So here's an example of where this is, where the forest, the carbon sequestration. If you look at Western Maryland, where it's shallow soil, steeper topography, or cooler climates, you have less carbon sequestration compared to some other areas. So I mentioned CREP at the beginning, and we want to start with replicating how the incentives as they're structured under a program like the USDA Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program works. And I'll start with a forest buffer for 15 years. So they're paying 3 times the annual soil rental rate. The forest buffer costs are, on average, in Maryland, about $2,200, $2,100. And that's coming from UMCs, Lisa Wanger, and others. And then the signing bonus that Maryland has for buffers of $1,000 on top of all that. And this is soil rental rate. So in GIS, we know the soil distribution everywhere, and we know the soil rental rates that come from the USDA Farm Service Agency from Laura Pleasanton. And we're able to map out for every single parcels what the 3 highest soil types are in the buffer and what the weighted average of those 3 soil types in the buffer, or up to 3 types. There might be only 1 type. But you can see, obviously, Upper Eastern Shore, higher soil rental rate compared to, say, Western Maryland. And that's what's used for CREP to figure out those annual payments. So these are the scenarios I'm going to show you some data on, but the scenarios are, the first one is CREP, which is 100% installation cost, $1,000 for signing bonus, and 3 times the soil rental rate for forest buffers. Now let's take the next 2 scenarios are inspired by MDA's program, but I'm not going to replicate that program. I want to look at the features of them individually because each feature is a different effect. So if we take the idea of the annual upfront payment, it's the same as CREP. In other words, it has the same, everything's the same, like the same installation cost, same signing bonus, but the annual rental rate, the 3 times the soil rental rate for 15 years, is converted into a one-time upfront payment. So that's that strategy. The shorter contract length, that's simple. That's CREP, just wherever it says forest buffer 3 times soil rental rate for 15 years, you just lop it off at 10 years. Shorter contract length. For targeting bonus, it's the same as CREP, except that the $1,000 signing bonus is scaled by that nitrogen map. The average person gets $1,000, but if you're, say, 50% higher, you would get $1,500, an extra $500. If you're 20% below the average, you would get $800, 20% less than $1,000. And then the CREP, but with the carbon offset, is the CREP scenario, but the carbon map I had shown, you're that many tons of carbon times the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative carbon offset price. Okay. So I'll show you what you get out of these, which is the participation, benefits, and costs for these different scenarios, starting with the baseline, CREP. What this says is that 16% of landowners are willing to enroll at the CREP payment levels. Benefits are higher than costs. The benefit-cost ratio are about 1.9. So it's definitely a worthwhile program. Most of the benefits are coming from nitrogen, very little from carbon. And now if we go to the idea of paying up front, farmers like money up front, 16% to 27%, that's about a 70% increase in enrollment. All you're doing is just taking the money and distributing it earlier, taking the payments and just changing when they're distributed. That said, it doesn't actually increase the benefit-cost ratio. It's not targeting any better. It's just getting more people. The benefit-cost ratio is 1.8. If you look at the shorter contract length, there's a slight increase when you shorten the contract length, but the benefit-cost ratio is the worst of all 5 programs. And that's essentially because you have all the costs of installation and bonus, but you only have 10 years to accrue the benefits. So that's the worst of them. The targeting bonus, that's a minor improvement. It definitely has the highest benefit-cost ratio, but the $1,000 that you're scaling by giving a few $100 or to those areas that are higher nitrogen reductions is not a lot, and I'll get into that in the next slide or two. And the same thing's true with carbon. You can see the carbon benefits are not that high. It's because the amount of carbon, what we're paying for it, is not high compared to other factors. Let me break that down for you. So this is the average or representative person under these carbon trading versus CREP. For carbon trading, back of the envelope calculation, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative from Maryland up to Maine, the northeastern states, have this trading. It's mainly in coal-fired power plants and other kind of trading that happens, but there's an offset market, and it's $35 a ton roughly. The map that I showed you, you get about 5 tons in 15 years, so it's about 1/3 of a ton. So here you're getting an annual payment of about $13. You look at CREP, the map I showed you on CREP, the average soil rental rate is $77. 3 times that's $231. So that's already 10 times higher. And then that doesn't even consider that down below, the present value over 15 years is higher for CREP by 10-fold, but the trading program doesn't pay for the installation or any signing bonus. In fact, trading's even got other difficulties, because what we know from nutrient trading is there's a lot of other frictions, barriers of finding partners, setting up, negotiating contracts, and so on. So in this world, for forest buffers, carbon's not going to move the needle. As a co-benefit, it's small. Okay? For other sectors or other BMPs, best management practices, or other things, carbon may have a huge role. Just saying, here it did not. And we didn't know that ahead of time. When we wrote the grant, we got funded, we didn't know much about carbon. We learned, but as soon as we did the back of envelope calculation, it was quite obvious it wasn't going to do much. For the bonus payment, I said there's $1,000 that everybody gets. That's what was set up by the state legislature. And if you scaled it, because that is at least in the control of Maryland compared to some of these things that come at a federal level, that if, say, for example, something is at like 1.5, that spike at 1.5, that means that the average person gets $1,000, but if you're at 1.5, 50% higher, you get $1,500. If you're at the spike of, say, 0.8, you're 20% below, you'd only get $800. But that couple $100 is nothing when you look at the final table below. There's thousands of dollars being spent elsewhere. And so unless you really change those fundamental factors that are now just constant across everywhere, you really need something that is scaling the entire set of payments, like the pay for performance or pay for success that's being discussed in all the different states. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Maryland, and Conowingo now have that program, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. Okay, so upfront payments, strongly preferred. Shorter contract, limited effect on enrollment, but lowest net benefits. Targeting helps, but it's minor in this case. And carbon offsets, just CREP is really generous. If anything, Maryland has doubled down the state legislature has doubled down and provided more money for CREP. So the pay for practice program has kind of just swamped out anything else. Now let's come to pay for performance, because this is kind of the new wave. And we just had a Chesapeake Bay Scientific Technical Advisory Committee had a summer conference about ag, about market-based approaches. And this is one of the main themes for the ag sector. And I'm on that steering committee, and we're writing a report right now. But these programs, each of them have like $10 million in a round of these kind of bidding programs. They're called pay for performance. They're called pay for success. It's kind of like trading, except with trading you had to get some buyer. Like urban stormwater or wastewater treatment plant to buy from farmers and do cross-sector trading. Here the government is just buying, and they have an auction system. Farmers auction in, and they rank the bids based on the benefits and nitrogen reduction, like you saw on the map of nitrogen reduction. And what the farmer's bidding is the cost they need to, say, do riparian buffers or whatever that practice is. This is really good in that CREP and even the MDA Conservation Buffer Initiative doesn't consider benefits at all in their criteria. Just you're eligible, you get it, whatever. Here there's some ranking. That's good. That's actually something that has been missing as we're trying to be more efficient with our spending. But one of the things that a lot of the agency, Pennsylvania or Virginia in particular, are saying, oh, well, taxpayers don't have to pay, they're not on the hook. The landowner has to come up with all the money, and we only pay them annually as they get paid. Our study just said that these people have a really high preference for upfront payments. So, this is working in their early round where they have made $15 million and 10 people that win, and they're getting $1 million projects. They're probably not even eligible through USDA. It has a cap at projects can't get $1 million. They're capped. So this has an advantage this does have an advantage that the taxpayers are not on the hook. The landowner is. It creates higher compliance for the landowner to maintain the BMP. They only get paid if it performs. But scaling this from a few large projects to many landowners that need practices is going to be a challenge. Another thing, and this is something we've been studying on a different project regarding max and cover crops, but we're also studying here. In fact, the academic version of this paper is more about the two programs interacting rather than something I've studied here. But let me give you an example with cover crops, because I think it's something that people understand. Annual cover crops for nitrogen have been a huge success story in Maryland. And nutrient trading, would pay maybe a little bit more efficiently, would pay based on a cost benefit, pounds per nitrogen. But the MAX program has been very big and is quite generous, pays about $65 an acre. And farmers if you're doing a program like this, you can only be in one program. You can either do MAX or you can do trading, pay for performance. The thing is that a lot of economists say, oh, trading's really good, pay for performance is really good. It's kind of economics 101. Best bang for your buck, that's who you should pay. But trading enters into a landscape where these other programs are not going away, like MAX. And this is what happens. In the next slide, I'll show you what happens when you have interaction. The axes are nitrogen reduction and program payment, or landowner willing to accept. And so if you start with saying there's two different programs, if you had cost share only, that would be $65, that orange vertical dashed line at $65. Anybody to the left of that will enter because they have a willing to accept that's lower than $65. That's the hundreds of thousands of acres that are in MAX right now, that are in Region 1 and 2. If you had trading only, you would have Regions 2 and 3 because you would have high benefit cost ratio above the blue line. Okay? The problem is that what happens is MAX is in there. MAX starts, been around for a couple decades, Regions 1 and 2. Trading enters in the market, or pay for performance. What happens is trading will get some new people, that Region 3, that weren't in MAX, that had above 65, that were to the right of the dashed line, but have really high benefits. That's good. A new group of farmers that weren't being met. But what Region 2 is people that were doing MAX getting paid, but now they can get paid more, so the trading is just cannibalizing people, paying them to do the same thing at a higher cost. And then MAX is left with Region 1, which is the lowest efficient farms. So MAX gets less efficient. I'm not saying that there's, I mean, when I come up, I'm just saying, if there are 2 programs, farmers are going to sort. It's not that there's trading, and you look at the trading reports that were written over the decades in Maryland or so on. So it's like, oh, look at all the benefits. We have this opportunity for trading. Trading can be good, but we have to recognize that it's going to be 2 programs interacting. Or you go back to the pay for performance, the idea that you know, having the taxpayers not be on the hook and paying the landowners, well, maybe you need a hybrid approach, not pay some money up front to help the landowner, you know, do the installation, and then, you know, pay them over time as well, but not something where you only pay them annually. So there are lots of things to debate, and this report that the STAC, the Chesapeake Bay Program STAC, it's being written right now, but there'll be a lot about that, as well as corporate sustainability was another big theme in that summer workshop. And that report should be available early 2026, and I'd be glad to talk about that. The report for this paper is available on the Hughes Center website, or my personal website. But the Hughes Center is the ones that really, this wouldn't have been possible without them, and Nancy, Josh, and Elizabeth, and others at the Hughes Center have been really, I mean, just, you know, that grant really launched this entire project. But thanks, and I'll open up for questions.
David, that was great. You mentioned at the beginning that when discussing incentives, there was a fairly high number of farmer respondents that just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
To which, you know, or for which money was not an incentive. What was that percentage?
Well, the thing actually is 46%, but you have to realize that a lot of people have buffers. The majority of buffers existed before 1998. They're marginal land. Yep. And actually, we have that data because I'm not showing it, but there's a slide I could show you in the report that the majority of land and so is in forests or buffers from way back when. It's just marginal land or forest land along the rivers. Then you have that early wave in the late 1990s and early 2000s, big wave of forest buffers, and then you have the continued expansion for thereafter. So we're really dealing with some, you know, it's kind of like half late adopters and half never adopters. And so those never adopters, I mean, you know, they're not interested. They're not interested. Some of them are anti-government, some of them are older. You know, some of them we actually don't know. The truth is we just don't know. Right. There might even be some constraint that it's hard to convey in a survey that they probably could explain, but you know, some of them wrote some comments, but it is interesting, and I think it's, you know, I put it this way: we have more questions than answers on that particular thing. Meaning, it's more something that's fruitful to study.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for your presentation. I was going to ask from a size perspective, and also I guess to answer a little bit of that 46% question, the farmers that I would mention this type of program to are not interested because of it's $1,000, right? And I have to get involved with the government. And most of the people that I work with, well, all the people I work with are small farms, and so this is based on acreage, correct?
Yeah, a lot, and you're right. A lot of these people are smaller farms.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yes, but yes, go ahead.
So
the majority of farms are small. The majority of acreage is owned by larger.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I can just say from most of the comments that I got is like, well, this is $1,000. That's not worth the time and effort to, you know, put that in. But I was just curious about what I think you just answered is large farms versus smaller farms. Who actually participated? Do you have a percentage of that, small, medium, and large farms?
There wasn't a huge, I don't think we have, it's way back when, but I would say, let me answer it in a couple different ways. One is I don't think there was a huge difference in the response rate from large to small, but sometimes when we've done prior surveys, we do a stratified sample, meaning the majority of farms in Maryland are small, either by acreage or by revenue or so on and so. In this case, we did mail it to everybody, so we took a random sample, and so there's a lot more small farms. In other surveys, what you do is you take large farms, medium farms, and small farms, and you oversample in the large farms in some way to make sure that you get more of that large acreage, bigger operations. In this case, we did everybody, and I would agree with your point, which is some of these small, there's economies of scale. In other words, if you're putting in 1 acre of buffer or 10 acres of buffer, there's a very big difference in, because it's the same amount of time, or a lot of time spent to apply and learn about the program. So small landowners are less likely to enroll, and that's been found in our study and others.
And I guess the last question is, did you involve field agents to actually go out and do these surveys? Because I have a lot of farmers as well. English is not their first language, or again, they don't trust, something that they get in the mail. So did you work with field agents to actually go out to their farmers to?
In this case, it's such a large sample that we're informed by discussing with people like that, but we're not visiting individual farms.
Thank you. Good presentation.
We have one in the back. It's totally fine.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I thought that I saw from looking at your graphs that those areas that had a very high end load reduction per unit also had a high soil rental rate. Is that an accurate correlation?
We did that correlation because it's actually would be interesting. So so it's not correlated. It's not highly correlated. In other words, CREP is really targeting or paying more in areas that have higher soil rental rate. When you look at the nitrogen benefits, and at least across the state, there was very little correlation. I don't remember what it was, but it was minor, very minor. And the same thing was true for carbon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So in other words, if you want to get nitrogen, you got to target nitrogen. And right now, CRAP and other programs don't even use it. It's somewhat complicated to convey nitrogen to farmers because they don't know. They know stuff about their productivity and other things, but it's really hard to convey that in a fact sheet. But unfortunately, it's not correlated. That would have been nice if it was. Well, thanks. And I'll be sticking around, and please feel free to reach out to me. We've been working on this for a while, and I've been presenting this to maybe 10 different venues across the Chesapeake Bay and Maryland, and definitely want to keep interacting with people. And then figure out what the next project is, because this project came by visiting Hans about cover crops, and through that conversation led to this project maybe 7 years ago. Okay, thanks.
I now want to introduce Maryland Agriculture Secretary Kevin Addix to say a few remarks for you.
Good afternoon. So I have 5 minutes and 42 minutes of notes, and so I'm going to divide this up just by saying I want to talk a little bit about what our priorities are at the top level at the department. And part of it has been influenced by conversations like this that have happened over a number of years. And we've been able to see what are, among all of the various priorities, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, but what are the top ones that really need the most attention? And I'm going to say there are 3. And I'm down to 4 minutes. The first one is conservation. And I think that presentation that we just saw illustrates why we still have a lot of work to do in conservation. I've said it many times, our farmers in Maryland will never, ever, ever be in a spot where they are not farming in the context of the Bay, not farming in the context of a community. not farming in a situation where if push comes to shove, we don't have the votes. And so, that comment where 46% of farmers, even when shown some cash to do the right thing, might say no thanks. The whole construct of conservation in Maryland is about voluntarily doing the right thing by the bay, by the air, by the water, etc. Converse is, if we're not doing it, we're going to be told to do it. And told to do it with or without money. And so we're working on some really innovative programs. One of them is our LEAF program, Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming, which will create a whole new construct for how we value conservation. When we're talking about conservation, it's not just the things that count in the Bay program that we get credit for, that Virginia's also getting credit for. It's a wide variety of practices that are commonly known. Many of our farmers are engaging in them, but they're not elevated, they haven't been lifted up, they haven't been socialized within the farming community so that everybody knows about them. Well, now we're going to be creating a list where farmers will be able to choose their own adventure and go through and figure out how they will earn points within this LEAF program. So much more on our website about that. We've got a critical meeting coming up next week with a focus group, case study group of farmers to help us work through how it's going to look in the end. But we're looking forward to that program rolling out next year. One of the innovations in that program is that it's not just strictly conservation as we think, it's also community-based best practices. I go back to that point about we're farming next to neighbors. Have any of you heard that sometimes farming smells? Some of you have. Okay, well, the rest of you, I would encourage you to, come out with me and meet with some neighbors. We know that farmers get it, but if you're moving into the area for a job and you didn't know, and then the season kicks up, and then all of a sudden you start to know, we need to bring it kind of and build it into the consciousness of the farmer that there are probably things that we can do to be better neighbors. We're not saying don't smell, because ag smells. But there could be things that you could do to mitigate that, or to be a better neighbor when it comes to noise or whatever it might be. And so there will be some community best practices built in here as well. A community best practice could be a farmer serving on a board of some kind, because we need farmers to engage. One of the reasons we're in the mess we are is that over the centuries, we've really just gotten down to business and as an industry stayed on our farms. We need to get out more than just the Soil Conservation Board, more than just the Maryland Farm Bureau Board, although join the Farm Bureau Board, or your commodity groups boards. But get engaged in the community. Invite research, invite students onto your farm. So all of those will be incorporated into the LEAF program. That's priority number one. Priority number two, very quickly, is ag literacy, which will be woven into a bunch of our other projects and programs. One of the challenges, as you know, that we have in a state like Maryland, really anywhere, but in a state like Maryland, which is by population mostly urban and mostly suburban, and then we get into the rural, but we're overwhelmingly urban and suburban, those folks don't have any reason to engage with farms unless we, as an industry, engage with them. They don't have any reason to know that what they're buying is local or not local unless it's in their face. This is local, this is not local. Kids, when I grew up, when many of you grew up, every year you did a field trip to a farm. Doesn't happen anymore. It's too expensive, there's too much liability. One ankle twisted on a pumpkin vine and it's over. And so we have to programmatically, systematically find ways to connect our folks to food. So that's number two. Number three is ever more present in our mind over the last 2 weeks, and that is food system resiliency. The fact that when push comes to shove, when people need to eat, and there's not a food system that's helping them, the supply routes are shut down. Think back to COVID when we couldn't get prime agricultural products like toilet paper, agricultural product, value added. and meat and cheese and eggs and everything else. The local farmer had it, but the local grocery store didn't, because the grocery store relies on lettuce from Arizona and meat from the upper Midwest. And so how can we build our food system infrastructure locally so that in good times it works really well and we're a good percentage of everybody's food all of the time. And in bad times, we're here and we have the protein and we have, everything that we need here in Maryland to be able to be sourced locally. So that's changing the laws to make it easier and better to do those things here. It's changing our food system, little tweaks here and there, like 20% buying local here, or one more school system decides to buy local there. It's decoding what they need. Great story, talking with a farmer, got a contract to grow carrots for 2 Southern Maryland school systems. Awesome. Grew the heck out of those carrots. But didn't think further, like, what am I going to do with the carrots after I harvest them, between when I harvest them to when the school needs them? Because they need packets of carrots, because they don't cook anymore in schools. They need packets of sliced, preferably chipped carrots that have remained chilled, refrigerated, preserved somehow in the 4 to 6 to 8 months since those carrots came out of the ground. One farmer, one crop, 2 school systems, and it's just janky. We have a lot of blanks to be filling in between. Where do you store it? Where do you process it? Right? Where do you keep it cool? That school system needs it different than that school system because they may have different facilities at each of their sites. So that's what we mean by that. We also mean, much more specifically, think about what's happened in the last 2 weeks, where we went from having full-on food subsidies for those in need to having none, to having half, to having full, to having half, to now the Fed telling the state that we need to claw back the money that we paid last week to help people eat. When you and I know, if we go to a farmer's market and we see those interactions on a regular basis, when the funding is there, people come in with their SNAP and WIC and Farmers Market Nutrition money, Maryland Market money, and they get the extra dollars and they're buying local, and that's great, great, great. When they don't have the food because they don't have the money and they go to a grocery store, the answer is probably no. But if they go to a farmer's market or they go to a farmer, because the farmer has invested in those crops, probably has excess of those crops, and also they're good people, good humans. There was a lot of free transactional food at farmers markets this past weekend. If we can grow more food, I'm not saying we need to have a food system where everything's free all the time. What I'm saying is, if we had the abundance of food being grown locally, the ability to preserve it locally, the ability to process it, to store it locally, then we can be much more resilient than our neighboring states, than most places in this country. So those are our top 3 priorities. The work that's being done here, just the conversations that are being had, and there are a lot of great conversations being had. This morning I was in Montgomery County, where the county was hosting its first farm-to-table symposium. And they had moved toward having a farm-to-table restaurant week, and the restaurants pushed back because they didn't know where to get the food. They didn't have the most reliable sources of food, and so the county stepped back and said, wait a minute, let's have a discussion about figuring out how we make this work, because we want to institutionalize it, but we want to make sure we do it the right way the first time. So the fact that we've got 2 really good conferences going on at the same time speaks to how this is kind of top of mind within our community. So I've taken more than my 5 minutes, so with that, I'll yield the microphone. Thank you.